Hey everyone, today we are taking a look at Vampire Empire from Stronghold Games. And first off, don't worry, there's no sparkly vampires in this game. But basically this is a two-player strategy game. One player is taking control of the vampire faction, the other player is the human faction. And this is basically bluffing and deduction. The vampire is trying to infiltrate this castle area with his vampire cards. Like there's an area full of townsfolk, and the vampire will randomly or secretly choose which of those are actually vampires at the start of the game. And then the human has to try to weed out those vampires from the castle. The vampire is going to win if there are enough vampires either occupying the castle or if he's wiped out the rest of the humans in the castle, and the human player has to kill all the vampires. Or if both players run out of cards, then you just count points and in a traditional manner. So like I said, it's a bluffing and deduction game. A lot of people love those. Some people don't like them. This one does it in a unique way that I haven't seen in a lot of other games. So let's go ahead and do the overview, then we'll come back. I'll give you my final opinion. Alright, just a very brief overview of Vampire Empire. This is a strategic bluffing and deduction game for two players. One player is the vampire faction, one player is the human faction. The vampires have to win by populating the entire town area here, or I'm sorry, the castle area with vampires, or killing all of the human villagers that are in this castle. The human player has to kill all the vampires. Now, if both players run out of cards in their deck, here's the human deck, here's the vampire deck, then you're just counting points of the cards that you have left. Now, at the beginning of the game, probably the most interesting part of the game is you have all of these tokens here, which correspond to all of the different villagers that are in this deck of cards. So you've got a cook, you've got a lord, you've got a nun, you've got an officer. There are all these different cards with different artwork and also different colored borders, purple, green, brown. And all of these tokens correspond to each of those different cards. The vampire player, well, I'm sorry, you're going to take all of these tokens and put them into this bag that comes with the game. The vampire player is going to draw 3 of these tokens and keep them secret face down to his or herself. These tokens are going to indicate who the vampires are in the castle. Only the vampire knows this information. Now, without putting anything back into the bag, the human player gets to take 2 of the tokens out, and the human player is going to know, and just by coincidence, those are the 2 that are out there, the human player is going to know that these 2 are not vampires. This is the only information the human player has at the beginning of the game. So once you've got all that sorted out, then the game is going to proceed. Now, I should note that the game comes with these card sleeves, and the reason for that is that each of the humans, assuming that they are humans, are going to start off like this. Now, if for whatever reason the human player does something that makes the vampire reveal his or herself, and it turns out that they actually are the vampire, as denoted by the tokens at the beginning of the game, you flip the card over in its sleeve and put it onto the vampire side. The human now knows forever that that card, that villager, is a vampire. Even if they leave the actual castle area, if they ever come back out, you still know that they're the vampire. Now, on your turn, you have several different things you can do, including each player is going to draw 8 cards at the beginning of the game, and that's their standard starting hand. And then the course of the game is pretty simple. You're just discarding cards if you want to or if you can, and then playing cards from your hand in order to try to stymie your opponent. Now, basically, combat in this game is going to work by choosing one of the villagers out in the castle area to attack another villager. Now, if you're the vampire player, obviously you're going to use a vampire to attack a villager. If you're a human faction character, you're going to take someone that you know is a human to attack a vampire that's actually revealed itself out in the castle area. Just some examples of some of the different cards, and like I said, each character has their own deck. You have cards like Secret Journey. Now, these always have special card effects, but they can also be used for combat as well. Place this card next to the city, choose any character from the castle and place it on top of this card. This character will reappear in the castle when there are exactly 2 characters in the castle and no more characters in the city. This is the city, this is the castle. Here's an example of a combat card, a hunting knife. Now you notice that there are different colored borders on all of these cards, and let's see if I can focus that a bit. In this case, this has 2 different colored borders. That means that any villager that matches at least one of these colors can use this card in combat against another character. Play during combat to increase a servant's or noble's attack or defense value. So that's the servant color, the noble color. Holy water can only be used by the human, and play during combat to increase the attack or defense value versus a revealed vampire by 1, or you can play 2 holy water cards to ask about the identity of a character. So you point at one of the people that has not yet been revealed as a vampire and say, are they a vampire? And the vampire character or player must oblige. Candlestick, play during combat to increase a clergy's attack or defense value. That's how most of the combat cards are. But you have some different special effect ones as well. Here's the Chapel. Choose any 3 combat cards from your moat, show them to your opponent, and shuffle them back into your deck. You have the Herbalist, play right after a human character has been killed before drawing a new character from the city. Shuffle the killed human back into the city. So this is constantly going to change. You're constantly going to have cards coming into and going out of the castle, back into the city, and so on. Trying to make things... The vampire's goal with that is to try to keep things difficult for the human player. Now, some examples of the different vampire cards. A lot of them match up with the human factions. For instance, the Candlestick and a Knife and different things like that. But you also have some cards like the Vampire card. Play during combat to increase or reveal a vampire's attack or defense value, or play 3 vampire combat cards to send a character from the castle to the bottom of the city. It's all about misdirection and keeping the human player on their toes. Claws. Play during combat as a combat card with value 3, any profession. So this is just basically the whole course of the game. You're just constantly trying to, the human player is trying to deduce who the vampires are and using other non-vampires, hopefully, villagers to attack those vampires and kill them. The vampire character is trying to misdirect and keep his vampires hidden from the human player and safe until he can either populate the entire castle with vampires or kill all the other humans. I skipped a couple of things that aren't really that important to the flow of the game, but that's basically Vampire Empire in a nutshell. I do think that Vampire Empire has a lot of innovative mechanics to it, and I do typically like bluffing and deduction games, but for me, there's just something missing in this one, and it's hard to kind of put my finger on what it is. First off, I almost think that the game is unbalanced. Well, you know, in a 2-player game, balance is incredibly critical. In a multiplayer game, even if one faction or one player's special ability is underpowered compared to the others, you have some buffering there. You can try to pit other players against each other, try to take the focus off of you, things like that. But in a 2-player head-to-head game, it's just you and your opponent, and it all comes down to both strategy, what you can actually do and what you're going to do on your turn, the different choices that you make, and hoping that they're the wisest choices possible to you at that moment, but also it's directly benefited by the powers and abilities you have at your disposal. And in this case, I think that all of the momentum is on the vampire side. The vampire has the critical information, and the control is sort of his. Now, the human player has some really, really powerful abilities, but whether or not that actually balances out, I don't tend to think so. I've played multiple games of this, and the vampire player, you know, was consistently the winner, whether it was me playing them or the other players that I played it with. And that's kind of a shame, because this is the kind of game that really, can be so thinky and brain-burny, trying to deduce what's what and trying to think of the best decision, and also the card and hand management, making your deck as efficient as possible before you run out of cards is so critical that it can be kind of disheartening when you lose just because you weren't able to guess the correct vampire, and that's a tough thing. Now, being the vampire player is fun. I mean, knowing the information of who's the humans, who's the vampires, and secretly making that choices at the beginning of the game, that's a lot of fun. But overall, I just feel like this game is missing something. I think that it could have been more. There could have been more meat to it. I actually think it would have probably been better as a multiplayer game, not as some kind of crappy team game, but, you know, maybe multiple players could be humans or vampires, doing sort of like a werewolf resistance type thing. I don't know, but I do appreciate the fact that it is unique, and that 2-player head-to-head thing is something that hasn't been done with this kind of format, this deductive format, that much in the recent past. So, and the price is right. It's a cheap game. So you might want to give it a shot if you like vampires, if you like the theme. I'm not a big fan of the artwork either. That's sort of, I don't know what you would call that, faux, I don't even know, faux gothic type of artwork. I don't know, but some people might like that. I'm sure people do like the more traditional type of vampire gothic horror art. And if you really like bluffing and deduction, it's certainly worth a try, but you definitely want to try it, because this is not going to be for everyone. It's certainly not for me, unfortunately, but it's an okay game. My name is Nick, this has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.